Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Level 2 informational call on the Collaborative Leadership Certification Program. Nice to see you both. And I'm just getting myself situated here. So we'll go ahead and start. And I know you both, but for those who listen later, I'm Rebecca, the Communications Wizard here at Round Sky Solutions, and really excited to talk about furthering collaborative leadership, that second level. And it's great to reconnect with you. And first, I just wanted to share a little bit about Round Sky and the sense of what we've been working on lately, just to get some clarity, because some people haven't been as involved in the last couple of years. They got their certification in 2015. So our mission really hasn't changed. We're a worker co-op that works with collaborative leaders and visionaries dedicated to world-changing results or just democratic and collaborative processes in their team or in the teams that they work with. And in the last couple of years, we've been focusing in on strengthening our level 1 training and offering free or low-cost resources to folks. So we have our free webinars that we've been pushing, Collab 101, and which is our online course that's self-directed, pay what you can. And then our workshops that we've been presenting at conferences and whenever we are able to. So if anyone knows some places that would like our work to be shared at, please do share that with us so we can continue to do that. But in terms of moving to the logistics about this call, it is being recorded and it'll be shared with you all and everyone else who signed up after this meeting. If you have any questions, you can use the chat box. It's a little bubble if you're unfamiliar or on a new device. And we'll take Q&A at the end, but feel free to put it in the chat box at any time if it pops up. So, and we have about an hour for this call. Great. So now I just wanted to give us space to get to know who's on the call a little bit more and just kind of ground us together, check in. And I'll start. So I'm Rebecca, as you know, the Communications Wizard, and I've been working with Round Sky for 2 years now, next week. And what brought me to this work was wanting to enter more fully into the worker co-op movement. And I was also craving a place to talk about power and the workplace specifically, since I've been thinking a lot about a larger systemic framework of power in the world, all the isms. And for some time, so I kind of wanted to come in a little bit more. And I wanted to explore economic justice in a way through the worker co-op movement. So owning my own power in that. And I completed the level 1 certification at the end of 2017. So I'm excited to talk about what the next step looks like with you all. And with that, I'll pass it to Cecile.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to see you, Jan and Carolyn, and welcome. Since I have the privilege of knowing you all for some time now, I wanted to share just a few more details about myself that you might not already know. So my interest in research around power stemmed from a passionate personal search for an answer to our pressing global needs to cooperate as humans, to enable us essentially to move and evolve past the toxic forms of leadership that are the norm in our world. And this search was really grounded in my own personal experience of trauma as a child, and then later trauma inflicted by my spiritual teacher of 18 years, who took such offense at a question I had for her around power that she excommunicated me on the spot. These things are not unique, but this is my story and what sort of brought me to these questions. And these harms and many of the harms that we've all experienced have come from individuals who were conscious, spiritual, evolved humans, not just those who weren't, right? And that discrepancy really highlighted the opportunity that we all have to understand power, its use, its distribution, and essentially the obligation we have to deliver generative power no matter what. No matter where we are. And so Collab emerged from our human legacy of trauma as a support tool to retrain us all in a reliable method for generative power.
Yeah, thanks, Cecile. That's Powerful to hear. And so let's keep it going. I'm just going to go down the list. Jan, would you check in? And you can say your organization if you'd like, although we all know you here, and just what's something that's attracting you to level 2 and 3, and any questions you might have.
Well, for the benefit of future watchers of the recording, since you all know me well, my name is Jan Sage. My organization, that is my own consulting company, is Media Sage. But at the moment, I'm involved with Enlivening Edge, a global organization moving the future of the workplace forward. I'm involved with Bright Future Now, which is a marvelous organization looking at how to build competencies in change agents who are moving us to the planetary era. And I'm doing a little bit of work with CoLab to promote it and move it forward. I'm in Boston, and I'm so impressed with everything I learned in level 1, not only learned but practiced and used in my teams, and had such positive response from the people on those teams that I want to get all I can, all the mastery that I can in CoLab, because I just deeply believe in it. I have some questions that I forwarded to Cecile, and a lot of them have to do with how to really make this, how to attack some of the challenges that I've come up against in implementing CoLab in particularly volunteer-only teams. And that's me. And there's Frances.
Nice. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, Frances. We're just in the middle of introducing ourselves, so I'm going to pass it to Carolyn next.
Hi, good to see all of you again, and exciting to see all of you again. You want to come say hi? This is A-time. So I am going to be as focused as possible with 2 kids and a dog, and my partner should be home any minute to take over. But my name's Carolyn Etzl-Vetter, and I am co-CEO of a yard-and-a-half landscaping cooperative in Waltham, which is a Boston suburb. And we are a cooperative conversion, so we're a worker-owned cooperative. And I've been using CoLab. I completed the level 1 training and have been using it with my leadership team. And I think my biggest pull to do level 2 is just knowing, as Jan said, that, I'm feeling the difference of doing implementation by myself without the support of my cohort, and really wanting that, and also really wanting to deepen my skills, both for my implementation environment now, and also, for myself professionally in my own growth. I can see a time where doing more of this organizational work with other cooperatives and other, worker-run organizations would be really interesting to me. So I'm excited to have this opportunity. And questions, I have many, but I think I'm going to just sort of reserve for the end, because my guess probably a lot of them will be answered here.
Nice.
Great. Welcome. Nice to have you. And it looks like Francis disconnected, but when he gets on, we'll let him have a chance to introduce himself. But until that, let's keep it going. After you, Cecile.
Yeah, so welcome again, and it's really helpful to hear about your interest in collaborative leadership and further training. And today I want to get us started by talking just a little bit about this question of power, because it is central to what CoLab is and why it is. And the question of how power in particular relates or translates into CoLab 7 conversations is a question I've heard. And so I want to spend a little time exploring that, and also exploring some scenarios of how CoLab works in real life to convert toxic power to healthy power. Before we move into then looking at how the CLCP2 enables leaders to integrate these tools and all the other course details. So we'll also leave time at the end for Q&A. So anything that we haven't answered in our presentation, definitely let us know. So on that note, let's jump right into power. And I'd like to start by reviewing what it is, because I think being clear about our definitions is a really powerful and a point of leverage in our ability to change the dynamics we see in our world. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that functions here. But power has historically been defined in many different ways over the centuries by philosophers, autocrats, religious authorities. Everyone has some kind of stake on power, right? What it is and how they get to use it, and their rubrics for how to use it, and whatever that might come to for them. But our personal and collective ways of exploring these definitions of power really enable us to reclaim this term and therefore also the territory. So what I discovered in my research is that starting with the most broad definition of power that I could find, the one that you see up on the slide, the force of enactment, enabled the ability to sort of see with more nuance what different forms of power were. And so starting with this all-encompassing definition really enabled me to articulate 4 different types of power that exist all the time when we're doing work together, which is frankly a lot of our existence as humans is this act, whether at home or at work or in volunteer organizations or other types of organizations. That is a huge percentage of the time we spend. So one of the strengths of mapping power as a force that can either be used well or poorly is that it actually allows us to understand the steps that go into creating healthy or toxic power. And the trouble with toxic power is that it is very difficult to change, right? There's a sort of momentum to it, or some kind of force field around it that makes it incredibly hard to penetrate and shift. And having the steps articulated of how we get to toxic power laid out means that we can actually construct remedial action at that point and head down a different path. And without being able to see the mechanics of toxic power, we are really essentially held hostage to it. And since we've already explored the definitions of each of these poles in level 1, I'd like to take a moment to explore what I mean by toxic power using this power matrix and how that gets remediated using CoLab 7 conversations. So at least 2 forms of toxic power become visible using the power matrix lens. Let's start with autocratic power. So notice the relationship to the term autonomous power in the use of the term autocratic power. And while autonomous power is the power of any individual that they have to use the force of enactment, to use power to determine a course of action, autocratic power is the power that comes from a single entity. That could be an individual or it could be a small group of people. But autocratic power is the power that comes from using that force of enactment to determine a course of action in situations where the entities impacted by that decision or action are not considered or consulted or even actively harmed, right? Actively intended harm and delivered harm. And so basically it's a situation where the collective input is bypassed in order for one person or one entity to have their way despite the consequences. And to use Wikipedia's extension of this term, an autocracy is a system of government in which supreme power, social and political, is concentrated in the hands of one person whose decisions are subject neither to external legal constraints nor regularized mechanisms of popular control. So I think we have many examples all around us of autocratic power and autocracy. So trouble is, consequence of autocratic power is that it often causes harm to one or more entities. We simply need to look at our reference books or look at the news to see the legacy that autocratic power leaves in its wake. The other thing, though, is a second form of toxic power arises from the opposite pole, what I call collectocratic power. Now, collectocratic power is a power It's the power that comes from using the force of enactment as a collective to determine a course of action for an individual where their autonomous power is bypassed. For example, laws around abortion are made by the collective, and they supplant the individual's ability to choose for themselves what will happen to their own body. So it's really interesting to me that the power matrix illumines the fact that collectocratic power exists. Even though this is a new word, I made it up as far as I know. There is no definition out there. People do not know what this is, nor do they recognize it, but it is everywhere in our world, right? As perhaps less common than autocratic power. I'm not sure about that. Research would have to be done, but it is still very, very much present. So the first step in being able to change anything really is being able to see it, to be able to make it explicit, to take it out of our unconscious, implicit experience and put it out in front of ourselves and look at it, right? Shine a spotlight on it and create some common understanding about what we are looking at. The next step is unpacking the mechanics of these kinds of power, seeing how they function, and then constructing new ways of functioning. Collab's 7 conversations is the result of unpacking the mechanics of both toxic and healthy power. And Collab's practices are one set of solutions that enable organizations to sort through their problematic situations and create healthier ways of being for themselves. So let's take a moment and look at these 7 conversations with which you are now familiar. And I want to ask a few questions. In particular, how do these conversations redirect power in a healthy way? And the first way that the 7 conversations work is similar to the power matrix. We are simply making visible or transparent the conversations and their outputs, and acknowledging that organizations are having these conversations. They are already present. So we're taking it from our unconscious or semi-conscious or implicit experience and saying, oh, look, this stuff is here. And that's actually a very powerful and essential first step in transforming anything, right? Or in learning a new way to be together. So this simple, subtle action really takes the conversations that are being essentially concentrated in either an autocratic or collectocratic manner and puts them on the table. Says, here they are. It also, in that simple move, clarifies that all of these conversations are already being held throughout the organization, perhaps in smaller portions or with content that nests inside larger content, but nevertheless, it makes evident that these conversations are required in every scope. So in this one fell swoop, this very simple action of making these things clear, explicit, we eliminate the stronghold that both collectocratic and autocratic power hold by taking away their implicit right to have those conversations behind closed doors, however they want to have them, whatever the impact, right? And the easiest way to do that is to start with a problem that an organization is already having and use the 7 conversations as a lens to analyze what's happening to the point and point to essentially the harm that's being caused by the way in which those conversations are currently being held. So let's get a little more specific though. I'd like to ask for one example from you, anyone on the call who has an example currently top of mind from a recent organizational situation where power was being misused. And let's digest that example together. So anyone on the call have an example they're willing to lay out for us at the moment?
Yeah, I guess what comes to mind is a manager in the learning and development division that I was in a large corporation, a very hierarchical. So it was clear who was in charge, and that we were, the 7 of us that reported to him were subject to commands, rework, shifting priorities, very a lack of willingness to hear input from those of us on the front line. And despite lip service to who's a new manager, so he came in saying, I'm going to stand up for you with higher management. I'm going to be your champion. And then when it really came down to it, it was clear that his loyalties were with keeping his job and making his boss happy. So we were shoved around to make that happen.
That's a wonderful example, Jan. And sadly, incredibly common, like that is the norm, right? Yeah. So in short, I think you could probably easily see that he is using autocratic power, right? He's concentrating the conversations that could be being held by the whole team around the work you're doing, around the priorities. That alone would take care of the fact that you aren't being asked for any input, and would eliminate essentially the sense that you guys are being shoved around like you're little bits of pawn pieces on a chessboard, right? And so the way that the power matrix works is that it says, okay, yes, we see some autocratic power in play right now. And then translating that into the 7 conversations is this question of what are the tensions on the table? What isn't working about the situation with the boss, with the manager rather? And in that process, even just implementing the standard meeting practice would be transformative, right? And that simple flow would get your input, would allow other tensions to surface besides just the managers, would make the manager not the sole deciding force, and therefore produce some shift, some beginning shift again in how those dynamics are playing out across the team. And honestly, the teams that I've seen that have integrated it, it can spread to the rest of the organization from there. The challenge, of course, is how do you get inside a situation where this is the assumed form of how leadership should work and a resistance to doing anything else. And there's a variety of techniques that we introduced in level 1 and that we can get into greater detail in level 2 about how do you bring sort of these guerrilla tactics into toxic situations. Ideally, of course, you have someone who is actually interested in making these kinds of changes, because that makes everything flow much, much more smoothly. But yeah, any questions or comments that come up for you, Jan, or anyone else on the call on that example and how that translates into the 7 conversations?
When you're in a, what's the word I want? Concrete is coming to mind, like stuck, hierarchy. There isn't, even if there's an interest in shifting the way of working among the lowest level, the next up level has no interest in letting go of power. It's, here was my solution.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the best answer, Jan.
Yeah. It was clearly, since there were many opportunities to try to introduce progressive thinking, and it never took hold. Yeah. But I can't help but think that if there might have been an opening if a way of speaking to, here's what the business is asking us for.
Yes, exactly.
And here's what we'd like to be able to give and do more. But here are all the ways that we feel hamstrung.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not just about us, it's about what we're trying to do for the larger entity. And that's an argument I think they might have been able to hear.
Yes.
But then maybe not.
Yeah, well, it is the single most effective place I found to begin with people, is to point to the organizational pain and the benefits that could come from doing something different, and then pair that with a simple incremental thing they can get started with, right? That like getting the standard meeting practice going does not require a lot of money or time, right? And so having that really low bar to entry to doing something different is really essential. So
It also, ops reports within that process incorporate something that we were already doing. We were doing a stand-up Kanban
right.
meeting
Yes.
once a week.
Nice.
And so it's like, okay, this, it uses processes that we're already doing, but it adds some new ones.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jan, for that example and some digesting of how these things sort of go together, and in a very practical way. And as level one grads, you all know that you learn the basics of the standard meeting practice and some details around the governance and operations conversations, like you were just referencing, Jan, the Kanban meeting and the ops reports being of the same in the same territory, right? But if you'd really like the skill to walk into any organizational environment and be able to change those power dynamics into generative ones, then the level 2 program gives you that full spectrum of ability with all of the conversations, and including the ability to recognize them, understand how to prioritize them, how to adapt them to a particular environment, and how to implement these practices to get generative outputs. One of the things I've discovered is, especially in implementations, like especially when we're getting something like this going, there is often a backlog of tensions, and often those tensions have been compounded. So there are multiple different conversations that have gotten congested in one tension. And so it really requires some finesse to sort of look at a situation holistically and say, okay, we have a purpose tension here, we have a business model tension, we have an interpersonal tension, and oh, by the way, yes, an operational tension. Which one do you start with, right? and how do you proceed through those and sort of guide the entire process to resolve what are complex tensions? Once an organization is sort of up to speed and using Colab, those complex tensions are often recognized way ahead of time, so they don't get a chance to get so compounded. But those compounded tensions are challenging to unpack, and having the additional ability to know which conversation you're dealing with and how to deal with it is profoundly helpful. So let's take a few minutes to talk about how the CLCP2 really concretely helps with those challenges. And you, having graduated from level 1, are really at the beginning of your integration of these life-changing tools. In level 1, you learned what the tools are and the basics of how to use them, but the implementation process is a whole nother level of complexity, as I was just saying. And it really requires that you learn how to initiate conversations with Colab's tools and processes, understand which tool to put to use when. In other words, you gain the confidence to teach and use all of the various participatory processes when you need them, when your team needs them, to get clearer process-driven results. And you'll also learn how to facilitate these complex tensions that I just mentioned. In addition, having an implementation plan that you sort of enables you to forecast and look ahead, and then the ability to evolve that over time as things change. You'll also get the support of me as your instructor and insights from your peers to navigate the particulars of your implementation environment, because that's really where the rubber hits the road. And having those particulars is profoundly helpful in terms of integrating the knowledge. You'll also learn how to really use your body as a resource for remaining centered in the face of conflict and confusion. And you'll gain some additional tools to develop yourself as an instrument of change and drive your own evolution as a facilitative leader. So on that note, let's talk specifically about what we cover in the course. And I'm going to take a drink of water before I do that. That's a lot of talking. So yeah, I like to think of the CLCP2 as an implementation intensive. So we'll be teaching you during the course sessions, the details of the practices, along with the theory that supports them. And you'll then be taking your implementation team through the practices, reporting back with questions and comments so you can learn from your specific experience. This format will also really support you in incrementally bringing collab into your organization, because that's essentially what's required. It does take time, and it's important that it do take time. But by the end of the course, your organization can be using collab, and you will have the ability to easily recognize each of the 7 conversations, know how to conduct both a full and shortened version of the practices according to the needs of your team. So one of the things that collab does is give a comprehensive package for how, say, you come up with a purpose for your organization or a business model. And sometimes that's fantastic, exactly what you need. Other times you need a small condensed version of the same. And the ability to do that comes with knowing what that full practice is, knowing the theory behind it, so that you can adapt without losing the value that comes from why those practices were constructed the way they were. So on that note, the CLCP2 covers the foundations of collab. And as you see on the screen, there's some additional points of theory, the cycle of change. We'll do more with technical and adaptive change. We'll also dig into the integral aqua lenses that inform collab, and in specific, how to apply them to your organizational environments, and also how they influence collab's tools. So you, again, can adapt the tools, the practices, without losing the core value. And you'll get a chance to develop your somatic intelligence further. And putting it into practice, it's really important to learn both what these practices are, but also take them to your team, put them to use, see what you encounter, and come back for further support. But we cover all of the other ones. The first point there is the vision, mission, and values, your purpose. We'll also dig into the business model, and that is a way of integrating open books management. Strategy, what is strategy? How do you do it? How do you develop a strategic plan? What does that mean for an organization? How do we do that in a way that's adaptive? And a big one, interpersonal conflict. You know, how do you recognize it? What do you do with it? And in addition to that, developing your own personal development as a leader to be able to bring these tools in with less effort. And on that note, one of the modules in level 2 is a personal development session that is its own session. You'll get a chance to focus on not only your own development, but providing insight and support to the development of all the other leaders in the team. And as you know from our level 1 course, this is a really rich and super valuable part of the course. A lot of that sense of support and being seen and appreciated and challenged at the same time is instrumental to our ability to grow. And we'll focus on the implementation. In addition to learning the practices, we'll be going through, how do you bring this into diverse contexts? How do you approach the type of organization Jan was talking about and get some traction with it? Leaving sometimes is the best option. I won't deny that, but if you have options to do other things, what are they? And how do they work in that specific context? So the course itself is conducted on Zoom via 30 biweekly live 2-hour online sessions. So this means every other week, essentially, we'll have these 2-hour sessions. And then on the off week, we'll have the personal development 1 hour, possibly 90 minutes if we end up having a slightly larger cohort. And that's also essentially every other week. You'll practice and deepen your understanding of collab's framework. And we'll also have online forums to discuss your challenges and opportunities to get feedback from the instructors. So that is the essential structure, and I'm going to pass it off to you, Rebecca, for some of the key highlights.
Great. Thanks, Cecile. That's a lot of information and kind of amazing how you set it up there. And what I want to highlight is the difference, like what you learned in level 1 and how that is built upon in level 2. So that's what I'll be talking about, and then I'll get into some of those course logistics in that you're wondering all the nitty-gritty details, I'm sure. So in level 1, we really focus on the big picture through the basic theory of power and the 7 conversations, right? We dive into those on a basic level. And in level 2, we really get into other key points of the theory, like what was behind it that informed Collab's creation, so that you have the maps to apply to any organizational environment and better understand how to adapt those practices in action, like Cecile was saying, without losing the benefits that it was designed to deliver. And then the second point is that in level 1, we focus on building intentional, grounded leadership through the PD topic, personal development topic, and through your somatic practice. And in level 2, we take that a little bit further through those off-week personal development practice sessions and integrating and learning how to integrate those into your team as well. So you'll learn the different types of practices, longer, deepening practices, or shorter ones, lightning practices for your team, depending on what makes sense. So I think that's part of one of the part that really speaks to me of the level 2 is deepening that personal development, since it's so overlooked in our teams, that practice, and especially on an organizational or business level. And so understanding the integral lenses and the theories of change, technical and adaptive, and getting that feedback from your cohort and the instructor, I think, is a really valuable part of that is deepened in level 2, continued on in lots of ways. And to go on, so in level 1, we really focus on strengthening collective decision-making and facilitating productive meetings, knowing how to get clear outcomes, starting to understand the flow and figure out what's really at the heart of things for people on your team as you're facilitating your meetings. And then level 2, we start to get deeper into how the 7 different conversations outside of only the standard meeting practice happen, and how to set those up as they're coming up. So how to bring in things like purpose, like Cecile was saying, facilitating the team to revisit their purpose perhaps, or to go through that process for the first time, opening up your business model conversation through brainstorming, focusing on scenario building. How does your business do that on a collective framework? And facilitating that strategy process, that the way that everyone can know how to prioritize, and really getting your team on board and knowing what the priorities are on a strategic basis and how it connects to your business model. Connecting that to your or on the other side, then your governance conversation and those outputs, really deepening in on what that looks like for how to facilitate that in your team and make that happen. You'll have another overview of accountability systems on an organizational basis. So we really got in the individual basis for the most part in level 1, so deepening your understanding of an accountability system on that collective basis. And then facilitating those interpersonal conversations, both nurturing the team's cohesion together and addressing tensions as they arise, which they inevitably will, especially as we're doing this deep collective work, and sorting out what to do with those complex tensions that Cecile mentioned. So there's a lot in that, a lot of deepening. And oops, not done yet. And then in level 1, we focus on helping you introduce the standard meeting practice to your team and introducing collab and facilitating that, knowing the scribing role. And then in level 2, providing a really intensive way of how to embed these practices in your organization. So you're experimenting with them, you're using them, you're seeing where they work, and then figuring out how to get ongoing support so they keep working for your team. The places that are tricky, and when you're learning something and a team is learning something together, and then you hit a rough spot and it's tricky, getting that support for working through it, so not everyone's like, oh, this doesn't work. So that happens. Humans don't like learning. that much hard process. So getting that support so you know how to handle it, and the work that you put in is not for nothing. So by the end of the course, your organization has the opportunity to have integrated all of CoLab and its benefits, all the 7 conversations, and that's the big hope for us and the big drive. So with that intention, it can happen. So for that, I will transition to some of the logistics, some of the nitty-gritty details. So we'll have smallish cohorts between 3 to 7 people for 30 weeks. And as Cecile said, we're alternating instruction each week. So 2 hours on the odd numbered weeks. And then on the even numbered weeks, we'll have 1 hour personal development sessions. So really diving into those practices, not only your own personal development, but the organizational. And then we'll also have, you'll continue to practice facilitating and scribing during these calls. That will be continued and deepened, just like it was in level 1 to level 2. You'll have a course platform and forums that you can use to connect with each other outside of the calls. And the commitment is about 4 to 6 hours a week, including those sessions. And outside of those homework hours, you'll be integrating this into your team, which it's hard to put a number on. So whatever that looks like for your team, that we assume this will be a part of your work already. So maybe add on to it, make things a little bit longer, but it'll be a part of answering those big tensions for yourself. And then you'll have another certification exam to make sure you've demonstrated all of the key components, and we'll start this the week of August 5th. And we've built this to have breaks built in for deeper integration. We've found that people really benefit from having like an off week to revisit what they've learned over the last month or so and come back clear, or catch up on their homework, or whatever that looks like, whatever kind of helpful thing. So we built in those breaks. So it'll end the week of April 7th. So you'll have it's a bit longer than 30 weeks because of those breaks. And I can give everyone the outline for that. And the cost is $3,000, and we can do payment plans if you are a Vermont resident, or if you they qualify for VSAC funding. It's part of that. And then we also have a referral policy. So if you refer anyone to level 1 or level 2, if you do someone in level 1 and you get them on board in a way that we couldn't, 20% of that tuition that they pay goes towards yours. So if you refer someone to level 1, it's $2,500, and they pay the full price. $500 of that goes to your $3,000 tuition, just to break that down a little bit. It's a lot of numbers. So those are the logistics, and we will go into Q&A. Maybe we'll take a deep breath. A lot of information. Great. So I think we'll start with just like a few seconds of silence, and I have the questions from Jan. We'll get into those. So I'll just let us have like a moment to kind of soak all that information in. Okay, a quick moment. So one question that we have here is, if we work on teams that don't use or need a business model and strategy, do you have alternatives to real world application that can help us to effectively practice these processes?
Awesome question. So of course, CoLab contends that every time you're working together, there is a business model or strategy or a purpose conversation that's happening. Often those are happening implicitly, right? Especially in organizational environments. Perhaps you're not actually, formally legalized. Maybe you're volunteer-based, as Jan was pointing to. What's less obvious is, what is that business model in those less formal situations? And I can promise you that there is a business model there, and my work with you throughout the course is to help you identify what is that and how do we have that conversation. And in fact, it can be quite catalytic for environments that have assumed that they don't have one, right? to recognize that they indeed do. And it could be as simple as, oh, wow, we are on a volunteer team and we do rely on these hours from our people, right? And those hours are critical to our being able to do what we say we want to do. And by the way, there's a lot more that goes into a business model than just what the hours are. There are things like, what is your value proposition? What are you offering to people? And are you, receiving enough back in return to have this still make sense? So yes, there are alternatives if you wish, but basically I think of it as tailoring it to your specific environment. So I don't know if that answered your question, Jan, but feel free to clarify if you'd like.
No, that does. And I sense that was probably true because I've had a glimpse at the value proposition model from Strategizer.
Nice.
As well as their business model canvas.
Yes.
And, those are perfectly applicable, whether it's a profit or a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think that clarifying what it is that we're putting in for what it is that we're producing and whether or not that's producing value is an equation that needs to be made specific and implicit.
Yeah.
Explicit.
Taken out of the implicit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it is there. It's just
Yeah.
we're not recognizing it.
Yeah. Nice.
Right. And I think that I would just add that value can look like a lot of different things. So it doesn't have to be the way that we often think about it in our capitalistic society, like you're producing something and people will consume it. So value can be a community deepening together and learning together. That's a big value. Although you can't put a price tag on that. Maybe, I'm sure someone could, but it doesn't need to have a price tag.
No.
So I just want to offer that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
We have more questions here, but I want to have a little mix of them. Carolyn, did you have any that you wanted to ask at this moment?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in about, I know initially you were conceiving about doing a level 2, level 3, and where we're at with that. And if this call's not the time to do that, maybe we can just follow up after.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch base on that, Carolyn. At the moment, we don't have enough people interested in taking both to sort of have brought it into this call. Should that change in the next week or two, that is certainly still an option. But let me just briefly talk about what level 3 is. It's essentially taking what you've learned in level 2 and implementing it in 3 different organizational environments and doing case studies of each of those 3. That case study involves using a research tool that we've developed, so you can take intake snapshot of your organization and an exit snapshot or an interim snapshot, and there's data in there that you can make use of to then help produce the case study, which is also then blended with your actual experience of what was it like to work on the ground with this organization, what happened, what didn't work, what did work, what was the outcome. And those 3 case studies are then constitute your graduation or the certification requirements for obtaining the level 3 certification. So it can be done in conjunction with level 2, which is why we were offering it at the same time. It's also, that much more work, and it's also fine to pick up level 3 whenever you feel like you're ready for that. You have the bandwidth to take on more implementations. Does that answer it generally for you, Carolyn?
Yeah, thank you. Yep.
Great question. And so I'll bring in another of Jan's question. And Jan, if you have those front of mind, I'm assuming you asked them beforehand, so you didn't lose them. But feel free to elaborate. So during the course, will you share more detail about your real-world experiences with implementing collab in various company cultures?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that'll be woven into the instruction into each of the sort of various modules around the practices, and of course open to questions at any time around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to say a little bit more about that, in the last couple of years, we've worked with small cooperative housing communities to huge corporations that are definitely not usually our target audience, but found the benefit of collaborative leadership in their team, to then small cooperative businesses and a nonprofit. So we kind of do have the various types of cultures, all types of cultures that have started using collab within it. And I think that common thread is that desire for people to have some ownership over the work, whether it's financial ownership, maybe not, but this investment in their own leadership and ownership. So just have that kind of broaden that out a little bit. And the next question is, do these courses include promotional resources?
Short answer is yes. We will certainly make available all of the promotional resources that we have. And I know, Jan, that you're working on a new cool one, which hopefully we can also offer as a resource to people who are looking to get that, next implementation client, or even their chosen implementation environment for the course itself. So that's perhaps something that was implicit in our outlining of this, but foundational to taking this course is having an implementation environment that is willing to have you bring these tools to it. And we will work with you at the beginning of the course to make sure that you've got that implementation environment, because it's so key to being able to actually learn.
So kind of just to keep going off of that, what kinds of resources or assistance can students expect from us to find clients to fulfill the practicum project?
Yeah, so it's essentially, we have several sort of cheat sheets or summaries of what Collab is and how it works, the benefits it offers. And those are sort of hard copy things that you can take with you to speak with a client. We'll also walk through and debrief different scenarios for what might you encounter in your conversations with people, including, whatever experiences you've had so far. Certainly, if we happen to know clients that are looking for help and might be interested in working with you at a lower cost or for free, that's something that we can connect you with them if we happen to have those in our pipeline at the moment.
Great, thanks. And what are some other questions that folks have that weren't answered, if any? Great. Well, that's good feedback for us, that we're pretty thorough on what you can expect from the course. And I will send this recording out so you can review it if you'd like. And I'll also send out the dates that the breaks fall on, so that you can have that in your calendar. And applications are due July 6th. So please do get those in. They're on that this website, roundskysolutions.com/CLCP2. And it probably is in your email as well. So we're really excited to have you all continue thinking about how this works for yourself. Great.
Well, thanks for coming, Jan. Carolyn, it's great to see you. Sorry we missed Francis. He must have gotten eaten by the Ethernet. Hopefully he's okay. All right.
Thank you. It was good seeing you all.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy your afternoons.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.